Welcome back to Season 3 of the podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Blackwood. As many of you know, I wrote my autobiography as a survivor of human trafficking called Custom Justice, but if you didn't know, you do now. Keeping in line with that, this entire season has been focused on interviewing people who did or plan to write about their own experiences as trauma survivors and how they overcame their past. If that sounds like you, reach out. We can talk about having you on the show, too. As much as we all hate commercials, they are a necessary evil these days. This is what keeps the show on the air. You can also show support by purchasing one of my mini books or donating through PayPal. You can find the links to either option in the podcast description. As always, a portion of the proceeds do go to local organizations that help fight human trafficking. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Amanda Blackwood, your host. As some of you can tell, I'm still suffering a little bit with a laryngitis, but it is fading slowly but surely. I have a fantastic guest with us today. Her name is Donna. Donna Conley she's been working with people for a long time as a human resource manager, but she's got her own story behind that too. And I know when a lot of us are working in different companies and stuff, if we end up having to have conversations with human resources, it can be a little intimidating. So it's interesting to have somebody on the show like Donna, because I think this is a great way of being able to remember that not only are they human, but they have their own stories too. And in a lot of ways, they can relate to us in ways that we wouldn't think of normally. Welcome to the show. I'm happy to have you, Donna.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. It's so great to be here. I am excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. I'm excited to get to know you. Let's start off with something super simple. Where are you originally from?
I am from Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. But when I say home, when I go to home in my mind, I go to West Virginia to my Nan's house.
Oh, sounds like there was some real love right there.
Oh, yeah.
Aw. Tell us a little bit. I know that you resources thing for a long time. Now you're transferring, kind of transitioning over to being you're a certified Duke health and wellness coach. You're a meditation teacher, a sound healer, an energy healer, a blogger, and an author with a national best-selling book. This is amazing. I've known a few of my human resources managers in the past. None of them were this interesting. What kind of trauma did you experience in your youth that kind of like directed you towards all of this?
Well, I call it the trifecta. I have, and I think it's really important for people that are healing. You don't have to remember what happened and everything that happened to heal. You don't have to relive it and anything like that, where the energy healing comes in. Because my very first trauma, I have zero memories of, and which is good. I'd rather they not surface. But my mother was a failed suicide attempt. Yeah. So a gun was involved. So, that was something. Obviously, I can imagine in my head the fear and all these things. Just being completely afraid. My dad was doing the best he could, and at some point in time, it was before. These two things were before kindergarten. So before kindergarten, I wound up at a babysitter's with my sister, and I was crying. I didn't want my dad and my mom to leave, and her boyfriend, husband, whatever he was, he came home, and he wanted me to stop crying. So his way of doing that was he took his steel-toed boots off and put his hand in it and was punching me. I didn't remember that. I had, they surfaced as nightmares when I had my son. I was 19 when I had my son, and I was having these, I called them Freddy Krueger nightmares. And I was like, I'm afraid to sleep. This man is going to kill me in my dreams. And I finally spoke up to my sister about it. And I'm like, well, here's what's happening. And she actually stuttered when she looked at me, and she's like, I can't believe you remember that. But we grow up we grew up not talking about things. So we just kind of stared at each other. And I said, it's not a nightmare? And she said, no. And the only other question I asked her was, I'm like, did the police come? Was he arrested? And she said, I think she said, Dad took care of it or something. So I guess Dad gave him back what he gave me. um, and that was literally the entirety of the conversation, because we grew up not talking about things. And then the third thing, my brother was older than me. He was in his 20s. He was a Marine, and it was a car accident. He wasn't deployed, but we lost him. I was only 13 years old.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of memories before the age of 13. So it's like the harder I tried to remember things, because I didn't want to forget anything that I spent all the time I spent with my brother. And it's like the harder I tried to remember, then the more I forgot, you know.
Wow.
But yeah. And when you grow up not talking about things, it was taboo to talk about it. He was gone, but his room was memorialized. My mom, with her, she was more than depressed. I don't know. She never really had a diagnosis that I know of, but she created in her head some sort of story about how my brother was going to save the world and he sacrificed his life. Then, so crazy stuff, like crazy. She had my sister and I, up until about age 16, paranoid that we were being watched and all these things. And it was insane.
Wow.
Yeah,
Did she have mental health issues other than obvious depression that was maybe kind of forcing that in her brain?
I think so, but to my knowledge, she was never diagnosed. She never, outside of when my dad put her in the hospital when she obviously needed medical attention, but he put her in mental health too after she shot herself. And I don't know if a diagnosis came out of that, but I think she was maybe bipolar and something else, because she would always dramatize, and whatever she dreamed up became her reality. I don't know how to explain that.
Wow.
It was very, very tough. She could be very loving, but then in the turn of a hat, she'd rip the phone out of the wall and chuck it at you. It was insanity. Oof. Yeah.
That's not an easy place to grow up in. I imagine you probably developed all kinds of issues like hypervigilance, wanting to make sure that she was okay before you stepped foot in the room.
I hid a lot.
Yeah.
I was in my room. I even have put chairs up under my doorknob just to lock myself in my room. Yeah. I wanted to, I was always outside. I didn't want to be home, but at times she would lock us out too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sucks. So how did you find yourself starting to cope with all of this as you were growing up and becoming a young adult?
In high school, I was an alcoholic. I say my son saved my life. I got pregnant and I got completely off of everything. I was very sober. I was very, and growing up in the church. And actually, when my mom shot herself, we had just gotten home from church. And she just went right upstairs and got the gun. And so we grew up in church. So Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday nights, that was church time. But that's the only time we really had God. But when I found out I was pregnant, a teenager, 3 people from my church plus my mom wanted me to have an abortion. Now, I'm not saying right or wrong, but my choice was to have a child. But growing up in the church, that really gave me some conflicting things. I'm like, it's not the Christian thing to do, but it's okay. Like, they were like, we can just tell people you miscarried. I'll pay for it.
Oh.
And my response to all of them were the same. I said, I've heard the heartbeat, and that was it. I just ended the conversation. But I was very serious about being a mom and getting things on track. But then, once he got to the point where he was going out with his friends and starting his socialization, my socialization went back to what I knew, which was drinking.
Right.
And I had started smoking. I never smoked in the house, But when mom went outside and shut the front door, she needed a break. And I was always smoking cigarettes. So it got to the point where I was blackout alcoholic. A lot of my stuff I don't remember. I'm
Wow.
still hearing stories. Um,
Hopefully, at least some of them are entertaining, but I imagine most of them probably not.
yeah, and when I wasn't drinking, like a normal day, I would have a pack and a half of cigarettes. I lived for happy hour, but Friday and Saturday night, those were like hardcore drinking days. I never missed work. I would sometimes, once or twice, I did show up when I should not have been, but no one ever knew these things because I kept going to school. I was raising my son. I bought my house. I've lived there for 23 years. I have all these things I was juggling and doing it, right?
Right.
And yeah, I guess it got to the point where I was like, I hate everything about my life. There was, I don't do what I enjoy. I don't even know what I enjoy anymore. It's like, did I even ever know who I was to begin with? So that started my healing journey.
Oh my goodness. So what did you do along the way that you feel like was actually beneficial to the beginning of your healing journey? What were your first steps?
Um, I went to my primary doctor. And anytime I opened my mouth, I just started crying. She's like, "You're depressed." She put me on some medicine, and she's like, "Please find a therapist." So I took the steps. I pulled up, my insurance and whatever therapists were in the network. I just started calling them. They wouldn't answer the phone, wouldn't return a call. They weren't accepting new patients.
Mm.
If they were, they wouldn't work with my schedule. Pre-COVID, it was 8 to 5. You had to take off work, but I'm like, I'm a single mom. I can't take off work. I need a full paycheck, and so it was tough. I was like, okay, I don't know what to do, but I'm not giving up. I want to be happy, and that was my first internet search: how to be happy. Very, very. It's funny, but it's sad. I was just in a very sad place. I really didn't know where to start. And
Yeah.
my first, what I call healing modalities, was EFT, tapping,
Mm-hmm.
and I did that solid for a year. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, if it's working, if it's not working. So I did look back and reviewed my year, and the big thing that I knew it was working. My mom, who was my biggest trigger, she did something, and I was like, you know what, mom? And I didn't react. I responded, and I was
Oh.
very calm about it. And I remember driving home going, "Oh my gosh!" Nothing. My life was not different. I had the same job. I had the same problems. I had the same triggers, but I was different. And I was like, okay, I'm on to something.
So what is tapping? What is EFT for the people who don't know?
Emotional freedom technique. There's certain tapping points, mainly on your head, your face. Um, One big one for anxiety and stuff is on the meaty part of your hand below your pinky. Um, but what I was doing, what I was taught, was tapping through false limiting beliefs. You know, I'm not applying for this job because I'm not going to get it anyway.
Mm.
I don't have the education, whatever comes to mind, tapping through it. Then I kind of shake that off, and then I'll go back through and tap in what is actually the truth. I've got the education. I deserve that job, things like that. Um, and it just reinforces, it helps to remove the false limiting beliefs, the self-talk that is not helpful to you. And put in positive thoughts, change it with, the truth, the actual truth,
Right.
because
I love that.
we're taught in life. It's like, if it's one person that you really, really want this intention, you want to know you're important to them, that you mean something to them. If you don't get it from that one person, but you get it from everyone else, you believe that one person. And that's where these false limiting beliefs come from. And, it doesn't make them true, even though you've been programmed to believe it.
Right. You get told your entire life that you're stupid, you're going to start believing that you're stupid.
Yes.
Yep. That was one of the things that I had to fight back against myself. And this is also the root of a lot of imposter syndrome that I think just about every survivor of every trauma of any sort does go through from time to time. We most closely associate it with authors or artists, but this is something that everybody can feel, and quite a few people often do.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's one big affirmation that I think covers a whole bunch of different things is I am safe to experience this emotion. Whatever is coming up for you, just make sure you keep telling yourself, I'm safe to, because a lot of people think anger, I shouldn't express it. Anger is a valid emotion, sadness, and even the feeling of not being worthy. It's okay to feel that, but you have to say, okay, I can experience this emotion that's coming up, and then, learn to let it go.
Yes, absolutely. And not impulsively act on it.
Right.
Yeah, that's very important too. Were there warning signs for the people who were around you? Were they able to see that you were struggling at all?
I think there were plenty. I had a high school teacher. It was time for exams. It was the last class before exams, and everybody left, and he yelled my last name. He's like, Conley, stay after. So everyone left, and he was standing over me, angry. And he's like, you have done nothing all semester. Just don't show up. Don't waste my time. I'm going to give you an F on the exam. So I didn't. I went out for breakfast. I did not go to school. He gave me an F. It said I was present. And it was like I was screaming for help,
Wow.
And those are the kind of responses I got. But at the same time, I was also really trying to do things I thought I should do. In math class, they're like, come from a broken home, all this grief, all this pain. They would never put me in algebra. Nowadays, kids have algebra in middle school, but in high school, I never even had algebra. And I was like, I'm going to college, so I kind of need this stuff. And every year I went before the math board, but my mom never showed up, and she never told my dad. She kind of blocked us from my dad. So I didn't really get to know him until I was able to drive myself. And I am my dad through and through. There's no doubt about it. But, she would like, I'll call your dad. We'll both be there. She wouldn't show up. Dad never knew. And the math board is like, you don't even have one parent that is here to support you. We're not going to, so they kept putting me in this remedial stuff. And it kind of taught me that it doesn't matter how hard I try, it doesn't matter, and it was tough, but I have a master's degree now, but I took algebra probably 6 times and paid for it in college before I passed it.
Well, algebra is a pain in the butt anyway. You give me English all day long and I'll ace it. You give me math and no thanks.
Exactly. I've only seen algebra in my professional life one time, and it was in a meeting, and myself and the president of the company were sitting there with our head kind of cocked over. And finally are you using algebra to explain this? And she goes, well, that's the way my brain works. It's the only time I've even seen it in my professional career.
Yeah, and I have this conversation with my husband all the time. There's so many careers out there that never use the applied mathematics that we're taught in school, and yet it's a prerequisite for being able to graduate.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in our little questionnaire back and forth that you had 2 major aha moments that really shifted you. Can you tell me a little bit more about those? What happened?
My very first one that really just exploded my creative center. My mom and my sister are very artistic. They can draw, they can paint. I would go into an art exhibit, and from across the hall, I could be like, oh, Laura's over here. And everyone's like, how do you know that? It's the way her stroke and her style, you could see it. She sold paintings in high school. Then there's me, and I couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler. And I grew up knowing I'm not artistic, but I was confusing creativeness with artistic. I'm like, I am very creative. And once I made that connection, I was like, they're two totally separate things. I started painting furniture. Even my cooking, I love to cook and meal prep and all these things. And it's, creative isn't just painting and oil painting, that's, it's so many different things. And once I made that connection, I just really started learning my talents for the first time. And so that was huge. My second one was identifying a false limiting belief, which was that I'm not important. And that was hard to come up with. But once I sat with it and evaluated it, I realized it's not that person's job to make me feel important. It's, I had to find things in myself and give myself the attention, give myself the love that I needed. And, it was kind of a hard truth to come up with. But once I worked through it on the other side, that's, I started seeing things change then too. I started to honor myself more, and my self-care practice was created after that.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think we all go through a point in our lives where our sense of self-worth depends on the people around us, which can be good and bad at that moment, depending on who your friends are. But it's so important to make sure that we understand that our sense of value does not depend on those people.
Mm-hmm.
They don't define who we are. Our experiences don't really define who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. But that was, started when I was young. So my mom basically, by her actions, was like, you all are unimportant to me, so I'm choosing to leave. It didn't work out, but, that happened. Then I was beaten. You are so unimportant. I'm just going to beat you till you can't cry, and then, my brother leaving, obviously if he had the choice, he would not have gone. But death is like the ultimate form of abandonment. You're not important, so I'm leaving. And once you identify this big thing from your trauma, that there's a reoccurring pattern, you see it in your adult life.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. And it follows you like a ghost.
It does.
Excuse me. I'll have to cut that part out. So when you started your healing, you started going through these changes mentally. Did you find that your circle of friends was changing? Were you changing physically as well as mentally? What was happening in your world around you?
Everything was changing. The first thing I did was quit smoking. My smoking friends, that wasn't a huge change socially. Actually, some people jumped on the bandwagon with me. But when I quit drinking and I got sober, what I wasn't prepared for was the loneliness. People don't ask you out because they're going to the bar. And well, if you don't drink, it was tough. It was tough. It was like, okay, I want to go, but what if I go and then I have a drink, So I would just stay at home. And, when 2020 happened and COVID hit, everyone was freaking out. My life didn't change. And that's how isolated I had become.
Wow.
Yeah. And the more healing I did, the more people I started attracting. And my circle has changed to people that are on, a similar journey to me. And priorities are more like their health and their well-being versus having a good time, which my definition of good time is different now,
Right. Have any of your old friends that used to be your drinking buddies, have any of them come to you and asked for advice on how they can change their life now too?
Drinking wise, no. I do have a cousin. He's like, how'd you do it? We're video talking and he's drinking a beer and he's just like, how'd you do it? Tell me what to do. But you have to there's certain things you have to get to on your own. It's just the decision. The worst thing, and everything the smoking, the drinking, and I became a binge eater. Um, it's all these inputs. If you put all these things in your mouth or your eyes, you're binge watching TV, or your ears, you're listening things that just make you not hear your own life and your own voice, is what it does, is pushes things down, because our feelings become trapped literally in our muscles and our tissue of our body. And if you're constantly putting this input in, whatever it is, then you're keeping these things down. So that's where my smoking, that's where my alcoholism came from. That's where my binge eating came from. Now, my binge eating was the hardest to get over. I still am working on my emotional eating, but I started using food at a very young age. Probably 7 is my earliest recollection. So, at 7, I remember my nan. I was there in West Virginia, and she bought me a box of fruit bars or something, but I just sat there and ate one after the other. And I remember her being like astounded, like, I cannot believe you just did that. This is not healthy. And I remember her saying that, which made me want to eat more. But I did not have a weight problem until I was in my 30s. And that feeling of being unimportant came through in a situation that was very hard on me. And that's when my emotional eating turned into binge eating. And, my weight just got out of control. So that's my focus this year, is on my physical health. I'm like, I've been doing this spiritual, emotional, mental journey, and I had a lot of stuff that I had to heal on the inside. All the things that the alcohol did to me. I had stomach ulcers. I have Crohn's. I was looking at losing some of my intestines. I had done so much to my body. I just had to heal. And I was like, you know what? The weight, I just can't think about it right now, because my body just knows what to do, and it has to heal. I was on so much medication. I had tumors popping up. They were all non-cancerous, but one was in my throat, and I lost my voice. I couldn't talk at all. And in order to get that out, they had to take out half my thyroid, so all these things, my body was just screaming for help. Like, can you please stop all this? And, yeah, so that's where I am now. My binge eating is under control, but I do still emotionally eat. Sometimes I eat too much, but I'm learning again how to listen to my body where food is concerned. And,
Right.
yeah, it's a process, and you have to be gentle with yourself. You have to be kind to yourself,
Oh, yeah.
especially when you do so much damage to your physical body like I did. Um, it's a process. Your bodies are amazing. They will heal themselves eventually, but you have to stop putting in that negative input, whatever it is.
Right. And it can be, excuse me, it can be really difficult with food too, because like you said, you quit smoking, you quit drinking,
Mm.
you quit all of the things that were bad for you. But one thing that you're never going to be able to quit doing is eating.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't go cold turkey with that.
That's not going to work. No.
No. So, yeah, I mean, you're definitely on the right track and doing better than I am. I'm still very much an emotional eater, and I've had a lot of my own health issues in the last couple of years, including thyroid disease, and I also have Crohn's disease. And you're the second person I've talked to just this week that has Crohn's disease.
Oh, wow.
So it's definitely on the rise.
Yeah.
You're starting to see more Crohn's disease medication commercials on TV during breaks and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. So when you were going through everything and you're seeing these big changes in yourself, and other people are seeing these big changes, you had mentioned in our little questionnaire that when they asked you what you were doing because they could see the changes in you, you told them that you were manifesting with the moon. What does that mean?
Yeah, and that's exactly what they said. What in the world is that? I started, it started on I've always loved the moon. It's always captivated me. But it was a very specific moment in time. I was looking up and I'm like, it's another full moon. And I have done nothing that I said I was going to do towards my goals of self care and achieving wellness and all this stuff. So I was like, well, let me see what I can do by the next full moon. And, as I learned more about following the energy of lunar cycles, on a new moon, I started creating these intentions. Okay, this is what I am going to do this month. And then I started following the cycles that way. And I was realizing how much I could do in a month that was realistic. When I was focused on my values and what meant to me, what meant something special to me, that I wanted to put my time into it. We waste so much time. And, the more I started working on myself and using these things, it's like, okay, so this month I'm going to keep working on the same thing, but I, mark myself, well, I did achieve this. I want to improve on this, whatever it is. And so when you start manifesting with the moon, wild moon healing style, you are working on yourself as far as going after goals, healing from past trauma in order to transform your life all month, every month. And so once you start following lunar cycles, it's just a great way to work on self-care. It doesn't have to be spiritual.
Right. Wow. It's a powerful journey that you've been on. I love this. I absolutely love this. I mean, when we think about the ocean's tides, the tides get pulled by the moon, right?
Mm-hmm.
When our bodies are 90% water, it only makes sense that we are also going to be pulled and affected by the cycles of the moon.
Yeah. Yeah. On the spiritual side, the moon is like Mother God. It's the feminine energy. It's the emotions and the mental and stuff. And that's what you see, especially on the full moon. A little bit of astrology, on the full moon, you have the opposites. On a new moon, there's Aries. When you enter the full moon, it's going to be whatever 6 months ahead. So under an Aries sun sign, your birth sign, that full moon is going to be a Libra. And you have this with the full moon, you have this Aries, which is me, versus Libra, which is we energy. And that's where a lot of these conflicts and things, people say the moon is new full moon brings out the bad in people, but it's, if if you know how to work with the energy, that's when you're like, okay, this isn't a good situation. But if you know how to work with it, it doesn't have to make you crazy, like people say.
And you went to Duke to become a certified health and well-being coach. So when people are looking for a health and well-being coach, they need your help. Who do they reach out to? Where do they go to find you?
I have a website, wildmoonhealers.com. That's where I have my booking. I don't have anything up there right now as far as availability goes, because I'm getting ready to have some surgery, so I'm afraid to open it up. So I've closed it for the summer.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'll figure out when I can open up more days. But wildmoonhealers.com, you can find out about, my book, any events, if I'm doing a sound bath meditation somewhere. It's all that information's out there on my website.
Very cool. And do you have a part of that you would like to read for us?
I will just open up and see what happens here.
It's always fun that way.
Yes. Actually, I opened up to the full moon. We were just talking about that. So I will read a little bit of this. The full moon has no light of its own. So when the moon looks most full, it's reflecting maximum light and vitality from the sun's rays. From our perspective on Earth, the moon appears to illuminate as the light bounces off its surface. While full moon energy lights up the sky for several days before and after culmination, the moon reaches fullness when the sun and moon are in direct opposition on the zodiac wheel. When the moon is at its spiritual and energetic pinnacle, it is full in its radiance, and that is when she is most appreciated on Earth. spiritually speaking, in relation to the work you started when the sun and moon united at the new moon, the full moon is a metaphor for fulfillment and completion. At the new moon, you created an intention. With the full moon, you achieve results, or at least your reality reflects your level of effort.
That is awesome. What's the name of your book again, and where can people find it?
It's called Wild Moon Healing, and it's available on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. But you can definitely find it on Amazon. There's a link to Amazon on my website, which, again, is wildmoonhealers.com.
And I understand that you had kind of, I don't want to call it a relapse, but that might be what it really is. While you were reading the book, you were struggling because you were forgetting to take care of yourself.
Oh, yes. So I writing the book was a huge learning experience for learning about myself and growing personally. So I realized that I take on too much. I would get off my day job Friday at 5. I'd start typing, and I wouldn't even go to bed until Sunday night. It's like I have an editor deadline. I want to get this book done. I want it to be perfect. And I wouldn't eat right. I'd order a pizza or something and just kept going. So I found out too, when things excite me, like I really, really became super passionate about it. And it's like, okay, it doesn't matter how passionate you are or whatever, you have to schedule self-care. You got to schedule a time. At this point, I'm shutting it down because everything else in your life matters too. If you don't do that, then relationships are affected negatively, and your physical body is affected negatively when you push yourself.
This is such beautiful advice too. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that obsessive compulsive disorder, which this is a version of that, is very common among trauma survivors. OCD isn't just something that people are just randomly born with.
Yeah.
It's something that we pick up and we learn along the way. And it doesn't have to be touching a doorknob a certain number of times or washing your hands for a solid 2 minutes. It can be something like working on a project or focusing on something so much that you forget about the other parts of your life.
Yeah. I think if people are there, or even if people are just like where I was back in the day, where I don't know how to be happy, I think in order to re-engage, some of the most valuable advice I could possibly give someone is ask yourself, what do I like to do? From the past, what have I done that brought me joy that I might want to do again? And then ask yourself, who do I want to do it with? And then make a plan with that person to do something you enjoy, and make sure you express gratitude and thankfulness that you're able to do that. That gets you re-engaged, it's socialization. A lot of people with depression and things like that, that's what you need. And adding gratitude and thankfulness into your life keeps you present and keeps you aware of what you have versus what you don't have.
Beautifully said. Very nice. So who inspires you the most?
Honestly, everyday people. Whenever I see something or hear something that brings my, it's like, okay, humanity is not lost forever. Just that young man that helps some elderly person in a parking lot. And it's like, oh, look at that. He doesn't know her, but he just completely helped that woman. That was so awesome, And even just a stranger that smiles at you, that smile can just reverberate high energy in you that you really needed. They don't, they have no idea what they've done to you.
And there's always one last question that I ask people before I let them go. And I hate that I've come to this question already because I feel like I could talk you for so much longer. But my favorite question of all is, what's one thing that you love about yourself that's not related to your physical appearance?
It's not related to my physical appearance. I think that people call me when they need help because they know I'll be there. if I can't be there in that moment, and if I say I'm coming or whatever, they know that if I'm able to help them, then I will. And that means a lot to me.
You're one of those reliable friends.
Yeah.
You genuinely care. That's beautiful. Donna, wildmoonhealers.com. I have absolutely enjoyed having you on my podcast and getting to know you today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and taking some time out of your day to share with the audience.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Of course. We got to do this again sometime because I always run out of time too soon. I seriously feel like I could talk with you for so much longer.
Absolutely. I would love that.
Welcome back to Season 3 of the podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Blackwood. As many of you know, I wrote my autobiography as a survivor of human trafficking called Custom Justice. But if you didn't know, you do now. Keeping in line with that, this entire season has been focused on interviewing people who did or plan to write about their own experiences as trauma survivors and how they overcame their past. If that sounds like you, reach out. We can talk about having you on the show, too. As much as we all hate commercials, they are a necessary evil these days. This is what keeps the show on the air. You can also show support by purchasing one of my mini books or donating through PayPal. You can find the links to either option in the podcast description. As always, a portion of the proceeds do go to local organizations that help fight human trafficking.